You're amazing, thank you. Paul McCartney had innumerable relationships and 3 wives. However, he eventually acknowledged who truly held his heart when he was 83. It wasn't the woman he had 2 marriages to. It wasn't his children's mother. Furthermore, it most certainly wasn't the one who embezzled millions throughout their nasty divorce. Paul made a startling admission about a secret he had held for more than 50 years. He claimed it was like dying to lose her because of the depth of their love. He was saved from the Beatles' breakup by this woman. The tragic tale Paul never wanted the world to know is revealed to us today. In the midst of World War II, on June 18, 1942, Paul McCartney was born in Liverpool. While bombs began dropping on the city, his mother, Mary, was a nurse who helped injured people. Jim, his father, ran a small jazz band in his spare time in addition to selling cotton. They considered moving to Australia for safety, but ultimately decided against it. Paul remained in Liverpool, a place that would permanently influence his music. As a result of that decision, the family's finances were limited. They occupied a modest rental home at 24 Road. Years later, followers traveled from all over the world to see that same mansion. Paul committed an action as a child that he would live to regret. He and a few neighborhood guys murdered frogs and placed them on fences in an attempt to demonstrate that he was tough enough for military service. Paul believed that this would make him more acceptable because males at the time didn't want to appear weak. Years later, he acknowledged that this was foolish and incorrect. It's unexpected because Paul went on to become one of the leading advocates for animal rights. He gave up meat, advocated for vegetarianism, and even launched a company with his late wife, Linda. He would later utilize what he had done under duress to demonstrate how people can change. Paul's world collapsed when he was 14 years old. Breast cancer claimed the life of his mother, Mary. He and his younger brother were not given many explanations for her prolonged illness. Her passing devastated the family. Paul discreetly turned to music as a means of coping with his father's severe struggles. Years later, he dreamed that his mother visited him in a moment of need. She assured him that everything will work out. Let It Be is one of the Beatles' most well-known songs and was inspired by the dream. He had always been surrounded by music. Paul began learning how to play the piano by paying close attention to his father's playing at home. Additionally, he acquired a guitar and began learning songs by ear because they were unable to pay for tuition. 20 Flight Rock was among the first songs he knew. Later on, that song would help him join a band that would completely transform his life. He loved jazz just as much as his father did. Additionally, he listened to rock and roll artists like Buddy Holly and Little Richard. Paul was persuaded that he could compose songs by their enthusiasm and style. He excelled academically as well. He took a challenging test at age 11 that very few children passed. He was one of just 4 pupils from his school accepted into the Liverpool Institute for Boys, a prestigious grammar school. Despite its strictness, the school provided him with a strong foundation in literature and music. He made friends with a younger student called George Harrison when they were riding the school bus. Nobody could have predicted how important that friendship would be. Something that occurred on July 6, 1957, permanently altered the course of music history. Paul and a friend attended a church festival where the Quarrymen Band was performing. John Lennon, a teenage boy, was the band's leader. Paul took up a guitar and performed 20 Flight Rock after their performance. Paul recalled every line, which really impressed Lennon. Although Lennon disliked giving up control, he thought Paul had a unique quality. A new collaboration that will influence music globally was formed in just 4 minutes. Paul soon assisted George Harrison in joining the group. Lennon thought George looked too young for his age. He was only 14 at the time, but Paul had faith in him. In an attempt to get Lennon to reconsider, he even got George to play guitar for him on a bus ride. It was successful. After George performed a solo flawlessly, Lennon eventually agreed. Without Paul's encouragement, the Beatles might never have formed as a trio before their rise to fame. The band experimented with numerous names. Prior to trying names like Johnny and the Moondogs and the Silver Beatles, they were known as the Quarrymen. They all failed to stick. In order to give the band a distinctive name, Lennon experimented with the word beat before deciding on the Beatles. He used to joke that he had a dream about the name. The moniker was effective regardless of the facts. It rose to greater fame than practically any other brand worldwide. Their adventure took an unexpected turn in 1960. The Beatles were sent to perform in seedy bars in Hamburg, Germany. They performed for lengthy hours every night, frequently in hazardous locations, while still in their teens. They used drugs to stay awake and lived in small, filthy quarters. They frequently faced threats from local gangs and occasionally had to flee for their lives. However, those difficult years strengthened them. Paul subsequently claimed that although being born in Liverpool, he actually grew up in Hamburg. They were a true band because they performed every night. Then catastrophe struck. John Lennon's close friend and original bassist, Stuart Sutcliffe, passed away unexpectedly from a neurological condition. He was just 21. The gang was severely shaken by Stuart's passing. Paul had no intention of playing bass, but he filled And after Stewart passed away, he was the only one who was prepared to attempt, and he was left-handed. Everything was altered by that choice. Later on, Paul's bass playing emerged as one of the Beatles' most inventive elements. Paul might still be a guitarist if Stewart had survived. Rather, he rose to prominence as one of rock music's most important bassists. An area so hot and crowded that water poured down its walls existed in Liverpool in the early 1960s. Deep beneath Matthew Street, the Cavern Club was that location. A cellar like that would have been disregarded by most people, but the Beatles made it the focal point of a revolution in music. There, Paul McCartney and the others performed about 300 times. The club was so crowded with fans that the fire department occasionally had to eject them. Sweat, sound, and heat filled the room. For a single lunchtime performance, employees skipped their shifts. For hours, teenagers waited in line in the hopes of getting in. What started off as a local performance evolved into something incredible. There was such raw energy in that pitch-black cellar that it seemed like a larger thing was beginning. Brian Epstein entered at that point. He operated a music store, was always well-groomed, and was difficult to impress. However, he witnessed something that no one else had when he saw the Beatles perform in November 1961. He offered to oversee them in a few weeks. He made sure they arrived on time, signed them up, groomed them, dressed them in suits, and gave them professional manners. Not everyone initially approved of the modifications. Although others felt it was excessively rigid, the Beatles had become the most popular band in the nation by the end of 1963 as a result of those modifications. The door was opened by Brian, and their tunes could be heard everywhere. The band made a shocking alteration in August 1962, right before all of that. The drummer whom the fans adored, Pete Best, was let go, and Ringo Starr took his place. A few folks were incensed. Chants struck outside the Cavern Club. Ringo was jeered. Even George Harrison was punched. The audience was unwilling to part with the previous lineup. However, after Ringo joined, everything fell into place. The classic Beatles were finished at that point. They released Love Me Do on October 5, 1962, a few months later. It received notice even if it didn't top the charts. It wasn't always easy behind the scenes. The song was recorded by 3 different drummers. According to some, Brian Epstein purchased thousands of copies to aid in its ascent. The music left an impression. Whether or not that is accurate, it sounded like a dream beginning to come true. Then February 9, 1964, arrived. In America, the Beatles made an appearance on the Ed Sullivan program. 73 million people watched. There were theaters all around. For one of the few hundred seats, thousands pleaded. All My Loving was the band's first song, and the audience went wild. People wailed, yelled, and fainted. The Beatles swept over America in a single night. As the British invasion got underway, Beatle frenzy quickly spread. Paul and the others stopped being just famous at that point. They rose to fame on a global scale. It was immediately apparent that Paul and John were unique. They composed around 180 songs for the band. Together, furthermore, they did more than merely sit in different rooms. They wrote to each other in person. Their tunes reached the top of the global charts in a matter of years. They had penned 24 #1 hits in the US alone by 1966. There were their names everywhere. Everything was altering because of their sound, and they used a handshake agreement to do everything. Nothing else was ever needed by them. However, things were not always easy between them. Yesterday, one of their best-known songs, began as a dream. Paul had the tune in his mind as he woke up. John didn't think it fit the band, so he played it for him. Paul decided to go it alone. He used an acoustic guitar and a string quartet to record it. Not even the others were on the track. However, it became the most covered song in history when it was released in 1965. I Said Something Wrong. Now I Long for Yesterday was not a reference to a female. Paul used it as a means of honoring his late mother. More could be stated in that silent moment than in any booming guitar solo. However, things were becoming more difficult behind the doors. It became intolerable to tours. The band was unable to hear themselves perform because of the loud cries from the crowds. After John said that he was more popular than Jesus, people in the South set fire to Beatles records. Threats of death ensued. They were confined to hotel rooms in Japan and the Philippines due to political pressure and crowds. Paul, who had once enjoyed touring, started to feel that it wasn't worth it as the band grew weary. Following their last performance in San Francisco in August 1966, they stopped performing live. Nobody was able to accept it. A band at its best, issuing publicity in favor of quiet. In 1967, there was still another surprise. Paul admitted to using LSD to the media. He didn't sugarcoat or conceal anything. He just spoke the truth. The reaction was immediate. The headlines shouted. Politicians were furious. Supporters were unsure of their thoughts. Paul, however, defended it. Anyone listening to Sgt. Pepper could notice the change, and he felt that it had opened his mind. Paul's personal life reached a brick block when he pushed the bounds of his creativity. When Jane Asher revealed their split in an interview, his 5-year romance with her came to an end on live television. Not only was it heartbreaking, but it was also widely known. They intended to get married. It was over now. At the same time as he did, Paul had to watch the rest of the world learn. Paul took over the studio when the tour was over. He thought of crazy things. The person he envisioned was Sgt. Pepper's. He introduced odd sound effects, tape loops, and orchestras. Abbey Road turned into a location where everything was possible. Although Paul never stopped, not everyone liked his pace. John and George frequently resisted. However, a large portion of the late Beatles sound would not have existed without Paul's motivation. When Brian Epstein passed away in August 1967 from an unintentional drug overdose, everything changed. He was just 32. The band was taken aback. John claimed that he realized they were done at that moment. Brian was the only one who could keep them grounded. The band battled with trust, leadership, and finances without him. They were never able to truly fill the void left by that loss. Paul founded the music, film, and art firm Apple Corporation in an attempt to address the issue. The intention was to support creative individuals, but it swiftly devolved into chaos. The money vanished. Untrained strangers were employed. Some workers hardly put in any work at all. The business was at one point losing tens of millions of dollars annually, the contemporary equivalent. Tensions erupted. The commercial disputes worsened as the others started to doubt Paul's choices. They hoped to get back together in January 1969 for a brand new project named Get Back. They recorded their rehearsals, but more than just music was captured by the cameras. Paul was seen pushing too hard. After an argument, George left the band for a few days. He felt ignored and unheard. There was actual tension. Nevertheless, the sessions yielded us the well-known rooftop concert and Let It Be. However, the cracks were getting deeper even as the music went on. Then the last blow was delivered. Paul did a self-interview to promote his solo album on April 10, 1970. He stated in it that he had no intention of collaborating with the Beatles evermore. More impactful than any news release was that silent declaration. The world's fans were in awe. A few people sobbed. Some people didn't think it was true. The dream had ended. John had already departed discreetly. Paul, however, was the one who made it public. "I just wanted to enjoy life with my family," he stated. The greatest band in history vanished in an instant. Following the Beatles' split, Paul McCartney remained silent. After returning home, he closed out the outside world and began recording by himself in his living room. He was depressed and uncertain about what might happen next. He recorded himself on a basic tape recorder and played all the instruments, everything, piano, drums, guitar, etc. The only person that sang with him was his wife, Linda. People were taken by surprise when the album was released. In April 1970, the Beatles didn't sound like that. It was quiet, harsh, and intensely intimate. Fans purchased it despite initial criticism from several critics. In a matter of weeks, it sold more than 1 million copies. In retrospect, that album demonstrated that Paul wasn't done and sparked a new movement of do-it-yourself music. He was only beginning in a different manner. Paul made a move shortly after that left many perplexed. Despite Linda's lack of musical talent, he asked her to join his new band. She had never performed in front of an audience or played keyboards. Paul, however, wanted her at his side and had faith in her. It wasn't always well received by fans. She was even jeered by some. She was also ridiculed by the media. Despite the pain, she persisted. Paul was by her side the entire time. According to him, the band was about more than just music. It was about beginning over family and trust. People eventually realized how resilient Linda was. Even though she wasn't flawless on stage, she never quit up.